Hello and welcome to the Kona recap special of This Week in Triathlon. We're your hosts, Kevin and Andreas.
How you doing, Kevin?
Good. We're coming to you live from our new studios in Folsom, California. And if you notice, we have a little bit of a suntan. Just returned from the big island of Hawaii, where last weekend, obviously, if you were, unless you were brain dead or your internet connection was out, maybe you didn't know that last weekend was the Ironman World Championship. So another year has passed, and Andreas and I were there watching the action live and bringing to you the best video and photos and updates we possibly could. And we're here to just recap the men's and women's races and some of the things that we saw out there. So, Andreas, awesome races on both the men's and the women's side. Let's just jump right into the men's race.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And if we're going to talk about the men's race, I mean, that was an exciting race. Obviously, Freddie Van Lierde was the winner. But it didn't look that way from the beginning. We saw Sebastian Kienle looking very good at the run, but why don't we start out how it played out from the beginning?
So I was there, we were having our coffee off Elite Drive at 4:30 in the morning, and we got to the race start as the pros were getting in the water. 51 minutes or so later, a huge pack of men exited the water together. Brandon Marsh was the first out, but there was literally no separation between the first guy out and basically the 15th guy out. There was a massive pack. Most of the favorites were there. Andy Raylert was a few minutes back. Sebastian Kienle was a few minutes back. But you had a massive group. First onto the bike was Pete Jacobs, our last year's winner.
Yeah, and I think you're being a little bit when you talk about the pack, I think it must have been 20 plus guys. There were a lot of guys in that pack, and as you said, Pete Jacobs was first out of the water. Andy Starkowicz was not far behind, and by the time I saw them, it was Starkowicz who was up front. But that second pack was just huge.
Yeah, it was absolutely massive. Like I said, Brandon Marsh actually led out of the water, but Pete Jacobs was the first on the bike. But there was no separation. And rolling down the Kuakini Highway, where you were taking some pictures, there was just a massive group. But right away, Andrew Starkowicz wasted no time. I think he was second or third out of T1, and right away he just went to town on the bike horse. He was looking to ride a 4:14 bike split, and right away he was putting into time into everybody. By the time he hit the top of Palani Hill, only about 10 miles or so into the race, he already had almost a minute lead on the chasing pack.
Yeah, and that's pretty crazy, because when I saw him, it was not that much of a lead. So that tells you a lot about his riding quality and just what kind of rider he is. But obviously it didn't turn out quite well for him. He didn't win the race. There was a lot happening on the bike, and as things were developing on the bike, we had a little bit of a bad luck, good luck scenario for a former champion, Craig Alexander. He actually got it flat very early on while they're still in town, I think it was. But it just happened to be so close to the neutral vehicle, the neutral support motorcycle or scooter, that he was able to get a wheel right away.
Yeah, if you actually look at some of the videos we posted to YouTube on the pro men climbing up Palani, you actually see Craig Alexander looking at it down on his bike, because going around the corner to climb Palani, he could tell something was wrong with his bike. And fortunately, the neutral support was literally right on his wheel. So talk about good luck. The former champion, I think, only lost a total of about 45 seconds ripping that wheel off, putting the new one on, and he was able to reconnect.
And he's a Shimano-sponsored athlete, and Shimano does all the neutral support, so I don't know if that had anything to do with it, but regardless, good fortune for him that unfortunately he wasn't able to take advantage of.
So, like you said, Shimano-supported athlete. Fortunately, he had, the wheels coming off the support vehicle are Shimano wheels, so there was no interference with his Grupo. When we get to the women's race, we're going to find out a little bit about Rebecca Keats' race, who's a Campagnolo athlete. Switching to the Shimano wheel didn't work out so well for her. But anyways, back to the men's race. I'm kind of curious to know what kind of tires Craig Alexander was using, because he's a specialized athlete. And I'm thinking maybe he was using the Tony Martin special. That Tony Martin, he had the new specialized Turbo S-Works tire that Tony Martin actually flatted in the prologue.
But he's actually running tubulars, and Tony Martin uses clinchers, if I remember correctly. So I'm just guessing, because the wheel that came off his bike was a Shimano completely carbon wheel, and Shimano does not currently make a carbon clincher. So I'm just making the assumption, but I think he was probably running tubulars and Tony Martin likes to, as we know, likes to run clinchers. So it could have been the tubular version of it. Regardless, it was bad luck and good luck at the same time, but unfortunately, as we'll talk some more about it, he didn't really factor into the race.
So on to the men's race. There was a huge pack moving up the road, and as a professional athlete, you know, I'm usually in the race. I've never actually watched a pro race from start to finish, and it was really amazing to me just watch how far back some people come out of the water. I'm usually far back, and it seemed to me like if you were 3 or 4 minutes back, the pack was so far gone that your chances of winning or even podiuming or finishing the top 10 or 20 were almost out the window right from the get-go, because this pack is moving away from you. So guys like Matt Russell, who won Ironman Canada last year, he was 13 minutes back coming out of T1.
And it's probably a good thing that you can't tell when you're in the race, because it's disheartening. And I was spectating just like you were, and when I see these guys just coming out so far, but guys and girls coming so far back, it's not like the age group field where there's just a huge line and huge packs where you can just continually make your way forward. I mean, these guys are riding by themselves, and if you really knew, if you were watching it from a spectator's point of view, it'd be so much more disheartening, in my opinion.
Oh, well, like for me, it was the first time I've ever watched these guys, and I'm just standing there, just standing around. So, you know, when 13 minutes goes by, it seems like a lifetime. But, you know, poor Matt Russell working by himself all day long. When I saw him on Elite Drive later in the marathon, he was still so far back. But, you know, a 3-hour race on the marathon, you know, is a long time, and a lot of guys were blowing up. So Matt, you know, he might have come out of the water the last pro, you know, 50 athletes down, but he ran his way all the way up to 17th place at the finish. So good on you, Matt Russell. Love you, baby.
Yeah, good job. And he was still coherent enough to hug and kiss Jillian at the finish line and say a little hello. Of course, sporting his America shorts. But why don't we talk a little bit about what we saw on the marathon? I was standing very close to the exit of T2, and I saw Andrew Starkowicz come out first onto the run, and it didn't last very long. I mean, up in that little hill, when they make that first right-hand turn, not soon after that, he was passed by Luke McKenzie. But some different running styles, some different ways of dealing with the heat. I mean, there's a lot going on in the run that you don't necessarily see as somebody watching from TV at home.
Yeah, so it was remarkable to me, like you said, watching someone like Andrew Starkowicz versus like a Marinda Carfrae running styles. But what's amazing to me is that this year no one was really running that 240 pace that maybe Pete Jacobs or Craig Alexander had done previously.
But can you tell when you watch these guys run, this guy's not running 240? I mean, can you actually tell?
Well, I can tell when Andrew Starkowicz comes by that he's not running 240. But,
sure.
You know, no disrespect to Andrew Starkowicz. The guy's an amazing athlete, but you know, runners like Marinda Carfrae are at just a totally different level. But yeah, you can totally tell. And it was amazing to me just standing there as a spectator on Elite Drive. There's almost no spectators, so it's very quiet. And a lot of the video I took that you can obviously look at on our YouTube channel, there's lots of periods where you can actually just hear the runner's footsteps. And you hear the runner's feet were just totally soaked. Every single athlete was just dumping massive amounts of water, ice, doing whatever they can to cool down. And it was amazing to me that none of these athletes' feet were dry, and you're only 1 or 2, 3 miles into the race, and people were already just soaking wet. Dew points were over 70 degrees on Elite Drive, which is absolutely brutal. That's very humid. Elite Drive was what I consider to be the hardest part of the entire day of the race, and these athletes were hurting. All of them were hurting because no one was really running that fast clip this year.
If you've never been to Kona and experience what it feels like, it just feels like there's absolutely no movement of the air. It just feels like just still air. The humidity just sticks around, and it never feels like there's quite a nice breeze to dissipate that humidity. And
the way, if you're competing, the way you have to think about it in the marathon, you have to think about Elite Drive and then the next 16 miles, because the first 10 miles are just absolutely brutal. And if you can keep in your mind, I just need to make it to the Queen K. Even though it's still only a few miles from town or just a mile outside of town, it's actually a couple degrees cooler. There's a little bit of a breeze up there. So as long as you can get your body up there, you can go a little bit deeper on Elite Drive. Yeah,
and some interesting, and you can see a lot of videos if you go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/thisweekintriathlon, or our YouTube page, youtube.com/thisweekintry. You can see a lot of these videos, but we spotted Freddie Van Lierde, who really wasn't looking like he was going to win at that point. But on the other hand, you saw somebody like Sebastian Kienle, who was looking very strong, even interacting with some of the spectators. We see him interacting with Jesse Thomas at one point. I think commenting on his new Perlizimi commercial, which is really funny, by the way. If you haven't seen it, it's on our Facebook page.
So you and I were on cruiser bikes, and when we were at, between miles 1 and 7, we were watching Luke McKenzie. He was doing fine, and Sebastian Kienle just looked like he was on fire. People were yelling at him in German and English, and he was responding to them in English and German. He was high-fiving people. When he saw Jesse Thomas, like you said, he referenced the commercial and actually turned around and pointed to Jesse Thomas and was yelling to him. So he had so much mojo going. I just looked to you and I said, this race is over. Sebi's got this.
Yeah, and being a big Sebi fan, I wish that would have been the case, but obviously it didn't play out that way. I actually thought Luke McKenzie was going to win for a while. He was looking great. I didn't think that the way I saw Freddie Van Lierde, and just to let our viewers know, you were able to make it out to the Queen K. I stuck around the finish line. My photo camera stopped working, so I just decided to stick around the finish and just take as much video as I could. And so I was watching on the screen and I couldn't get as good of a view as you did. So the last thing I remember was Sebi was running strong, Luke McKenzie was looking great, and I thought that he actually might win just because I didn't see Freddie Van Lierde gaining time on either one of those guys.
The way I like in the Queen K, it's almost like if you remember the early lunar missions of the Apollo program where they go around the moon and they enter radio dark out, and you don't know what's happening. And that's actually what happens is there's actually a part of the Queen K where they don't allow spectators, so there's no one really giving you updates.
Or coaches, or
no coaches.
Anyone except for the coverage crew.
So for 10 miles, I had no idea really what's going on. And by the time the race had turned around, it was a totally different dynamic. Frederick Van Lierde, he was just the engine that could all day long. He was actually really boring to watch. And I actually didn't even take that much video of him because it didn't look like he was running that quickly. But when people went into Energy Lab and guys like Bevan Doherty were walking and guys like Jordan Rapp were pulling out, and you have all these great champions that are really hurting, walking. Pete Jacobs ended up walking a lot of the race with Luke Bell and coming in about a half hour down on the winner. By the time the race came out of Energy Lab, it was just a totally different dynamic. So Frederick Van Lierde, hats off on a tough, hot day. The guy held together. And Sebastian, boy, by the time I saw him at about mile 23, all that mojo was gone. He wasn't talking to anybody. He had his head down and looked like he was suffering just like everybody else.
And he was. And if you watch any of his posts, I didn't get to talk to him afterwards, but if you get a chance to watch any of his post Kona interviews, he wanted to quit, but you can't quit when you're in third place. So the whole time he was just hoping somebody would pass him so that he could actually quit and just stop the suffering, but nobody did, and he barely hung on fourth place over James Kunama. But obviously, Freddie Van Lierde, he was one of the guys that we said, watch out for him. He's had a great season from the beginning. He didn't come close to setting the record, even though it was what a lot of people considered a great day for racing. There were very few wins out on the Queen K. Luke McKenzie, at the end, he could not get over the fact that he finished second. I mean, he was just like, this was the perfect day for me. I'm never going to win this race probably, and this is just as well as I'll probably ever do, but I'm thrilled with this.
Luke McKenzie had the breakout race. He was able to get separation from the pack, team up with Sebastian Kienle, and actually bridge the gap to Uber cyclist Anders Starkowitz and really put some separation between themselves. And Luke McKenzie, just to let you know, he's a very, very fast descender. He'd been practicing his high RPM descending. So descending from Javi, he was able to pull away from these guys, get to Starkowitz, and really work with him. And Starkowitz was struggling. From what I understand, his stomach was bothering him. I heard he was vomiting, so I think Anders Starkowitz was definitely running into some issues on the bike, nutrition-wise and stomach-wise. So, that 4:14 bike split might have to wait a couple of years until he gets some good conditions again. But he's going to need to qualify again because he finished well down. I think he was, 20, I believe he was over 20th place back, so not a lot of points there. So he's going to be backing up Kona in just 2.5 weeks now with Ironman Florida. So Starkowitz, needs some points for next year if we want to see that 4:14 bike split.
Just to give you an idea, he biked a 4:21.50, which was fastest on the day, and then followed it with unfortunately he followed it with a 3:25.30 34 marathon. So
which for him is, I mean, I thought he was going to DNF, and he actually held tough. He's had some issues, you know, at the Abu Dhabi Triathlon where he had to get carted off by an ambulance one time. The next time he ended up in jail. So, you know, hats off to Starkowitz. You know, he's
I think people were so into him.
Yeah.
Like, people were just, when he came through the finish line, people were just cheering him just for that particular.
People love that Uber cyclist, and I'm glad that the Uber cyclist is finally an American. It's not some German with a hard to pronounce last name. Well, actually, he does have
it's very hard to pronounce, hard to spell, hard to pronounce.
Maybe Andrew can actually, you know, phonetically spell his name and actually send us to This Week in Triathlon, so we actually can. You know, I'm assuming it's Starkowitz.
Yeah, I've said it like 4 different ways, so I have no idea which way it is, but
yeah,
congrats to him.
Congrats to him, and the men's performance of the day. Even though he didn't win, I think Luke McKenzie, he's got to have the performance of the day. You know, he can always, you know, I think his career, you know, that's definitely the high watermark so far. Coming off his 9th place finish just 2 years ago. So,
just some quick notes before we move on to the women's race. You had Yvonne Rania, who nobody really talked about, and he actually on race day nobody talked about. He ran the second fastest marathon at 2:47 without socks. I've never seen anybody run a whole marathon without socks. I don't know if you know of anybody else that does it in the men's pro.
Bevan Doherty, but he dropped out.
Yeah, he didn't finish. So, you know, he was somebody who finished in 6th place that nobody saw coming. From what I understand, he might have passed Tyler Butterfield at the very end when Tyler was getting a flag or something like that.
Yeah, I heard Butterfield went to go grab a flag
from Bermuda flag. He's from Bermuda.
And Ivan Rania, you know, the crowds were so intense, all the noise, you probably didn't hear the footsteps coming, and Ivan Rania snuck by to get that position. So Ivan Rania, you know, another one that was just running really well all day. The fastest run split went to another guy whose name is hard to pronounce, Bart Anuts. From Belgium.
I wouldn't have said it that way, but that sounds like it's probably the right way. He ran a 2:44, and then Ferris finishing 10th. I think the biggest surprises were the guys that dropped out. Not so much the guys that finished in the top 10, because if you look at that list, there's a lot of guys on there that you could say could win this race if the conditions are right. It was just the guys that dropped out or finished so far below. You know, you talk about Luke Bell, you talk about the former champion, defending champion, and also former champions. They did not factor in at any point. Good thing that they finished. There's a huge debate always of, do you finish or do you pull out if you've got no shot? Craig Alexander finished alongside Luke Bell, or was it Pete Jacobs, one of the two, but both of those guys, congratulations. I think they gained a lot of fans that day, and yeah. We can't move on to the women's race without saying that this is Crowe's last Ironman race.
Yeah, one of our favorite athletes on This Week in Triathlon, Crowe, will be retiring, actually effective on Saturday. Ironman World Championships 2013 was his last Ironman. And, you know, hats off to Crowe. He has had a great career, but he will not be hanging up just yet. He's going to focus on 70.3s. It's a little bit less taxing on the body, less sacrifices with the family, and I'm sure we're going to see Crowe on the top of a few more podiums.
You know, I love watching that guy race. I love that guy talking to the TV cameras. He just, you know, he just does everything with grace. So he's good for the sport. And yeah, so we'll miss him at the Ironman distance, but he's definitely not going away. So
the women's race now, you know, I actually felt the men's race, watching it was actually a little bit boring to me, but the women's race was anything but. Just like the men's race, you had a huge pack of athletes exiting the water. Haley Chura led out of the water.
As predicted by, I think, Slow Twitch.
And This Week in Triathlon. But she was closely followed by Amanda Stevens, Leanda Cave, and the one woman that we're going to talk about a little bit here is Rebecca Keat. Had the swim of her life and was right there in the pack. Was one of the first athletes onto her bike out of T1. And Rebecca Keat, who's an amazing cyclist, an amazing runner, 3rd fastest all time at the Ironman distance. You know, she was right where she needed to be. But again, you had a pack of 10, 15, 20 athletes that were moving up the road, whereas Marinda Carfrae came out of the water several minutes down, and you had a chase with Mary Beth Ellis to try to get her way back. Athletes like Yvonne Van Vlerken, I thought, had no chance to work themselves up back into the top 10 because she's finished so far back out of the water. But just like Matt Russell, in fact, she actually rode amazingly, had the 2nd fastest ride, Yvonne Van Vlerken. And the rider from the Netherlands, she worked her way all the way up to, was it 4th place?
She did. She finished 4th place in the women's with a 4:54. bike split. And going back to what you were saying, having Rinny just come out of the water so far back, when I saw her, I knew it was somebody important when I saw her from afar because she had a camera crew right with her. And I was wondering, why is a camera crew with somebody who's coming out of the water, you know, I think she came out of the water it was about 5 minutes behind the lead swimmers. So I figured it out, and of course, you know, we know how it turned out, but I think the felt IA had a little bit to do with it, but she's also in incredible form at this point.
Yeah, Rinny, she was my favorite going into this race, and I knew if she was able to keep that gap in less than 10 minutes coming off the bike, which she did, that Felt integrated aero bike, that new aero bike, she was the only athlete in the field using that bike. According to Jim Felt, saves 15 watts over any bike in the race, so having that 15 watt advantage, that's something I would take any day of the week. And you know, Shirley must have saved her some time on the bike, and maybe even saved her legs a little bit on the run. Rinny set a course record.
Yes.
And it was interesting to me. So she grabbed that record from Chrissy Wellington, and Chrissy Wellington was actually cheering on Miranda Carfrae. If you look at one of the videos that we've posted to YouTube, Chrissy was actually cheering on Rinny for several miles on the bike.
She was out there cheering lots of people. I mean, she was, but it's great that she's out there cheering on the person that's going to take her record away. But Chrissy Wellington was great. She was cheering out everybody, from what I could tell.
Yeah, you know, she's still an amazing ambassador for the sport, and you know, good honor for cheering on the woman that took her record. I would love to see that matchup of Rinny now racing Chrissy, but it's never going to happen.
I think a lot of people would. I mean, how can you not? You know, I think the first time that Rinny won, everybody was saying, well, Chrissy wasn't here. Of course you're going to win. This is not a legitimate win, but I think her performance this time around totally legitimized the fact that maybe even with Chrissy there, perhaps she could have won.
Yeah, I know Siri Lindley, Miranda Carfrae's coach, was actually bummed when Chrissy Wellington retired because she wanted to have that matchup, to have her athlete go against the best in the world and to take her down. And you know, she showed you know, Rinny's back with Siri this year, and she's back on the top step of the podium, and she has that record. So there's no doubt about that. But going back to another Siri trained athlete, Rebecca Keat, like we mentioned earlier. She was in perfect position, and when I saw her, she's a teammate and you know, a person I like a lot in the sport. I was actually devastated to see when she was right with the group at one split, and then the next split I saw she was 8 minutes back, and then the next split I saw was 10 minutes down. So Rebecca Keat, her day was over on the bike, and I was wondering what happened, because you know, the coverage never really tells you, well, why the person's 10 minutes back. The next day I found out that the Rebecca Keat, who rides Mavic wheels with Campagnolo components, her cassette actually came loose off the free hub, and her rear wheel actually got jammed, and she almost came to a screeching halt heading up to Hawi. So unlike Crowe, who had a great look of having the neutral support, you know, she had to wait several minutes for neutral support, and when she got the neutral support, it was a Shimano cassette.
Yeah, and you know, I feel bad, but that's, you know, as a pro triathlete, and I'm not blaming it on her necessarily, I'm just saying, you know, those are the things, you can't control if your body's not 100% that day. You can do all the training that you want, but your equipment has to be dialed, and whether it's her fault or her mechanic's fault, or I don't know what bike she rides, whatever the on-course support or the pre-Kona support was, it just can't happen. So yes, I feel bad for her, but you know, maybe this will make it so that next year she double, triple, quadruple checks her equipment.
Yeah, and you hate to see somebody that's that fit, that sacrificed so much, put themselves in a position that they might never be in ever again, to have the opportunity taken away over something that I've never even heard of that happening in a triathlon, a cassette coming loose, just tragic, really. And you know, Siri Lindley was giving word to the course to have her drop out of the race because she didn't want her running the marathon really for no reason. I think she could have finished on the podium. So it's obviously a terrible loss that she wasn't able to get going there. But you know, she is, from what I hear, going to be racing Ironman Florida in just 2.5 weeks, just like Andrew Starkowitz. So you know, she is on amazing form, like she showed here. She's coming off a big altitude block that she was doing up in Vail. So I don't think there's any doubt that Rebecca Keat will be the favorite for Ironman Florida.
So just to touch on some of the top 5 and top 10, obviously Rinny, Rachel Joyce, who led for a good amount of the race, and you kind of could tell that at some point she was going to get caught, but she gave it an awesome shot, and she did hang on for second. Liz Blatchford who I think was a surprise for a lot of people. She finished third. Carolyn Steffen, you know, both you and I discussed before Kona that she was probably not going to factor in. She's been racing a lot this year. She raced really close to Kona, so she didn't have a performance like the last couple of years. We learned that Leanna Cave may have had some issues, and she...
Yeah, Leanna Cave, what a gutsy performance she had today. She obviously finished, you know, higher up than her male compatriot Pete Jacobs, but Leanna Cave was really struggling with some high hamstring issues. She actually tore her hamstring early in the year. Didn't really let a lot of people know that other than her coach. She did have a cortisone injection in her hamstring to reduce some of the swelling. It really wasn't pain-free up until the week before the race, so she had really been hamstrung, literally, you know, since, you know, the beginning of the year. So, you know, gutsy performance by her. I can't wait to see her coming back to top form and seeing the Superbird, you know, right there with the best of them.
And again, check out some of the videos that we've got, because there's a really cool video that you posted in which Leanna Cave and, is it Rini?
Yvonne Van Vlerken.
Yvonne Van Vlerken, as she's making the pass, they hold hands for a few seconds. So that's really cool. You can find the videos on our YouTube page, youtube.com/thisweekintri or facebook.com/thisweekinttriathlon. And feel free to share them, comment on them, do whatever you want. I mean, we just want as much interaction as we can, but the videos are great.
So we have a new feature on This Week in Triathlon called the Freak of the Week, which is where we highlight an exceptional performance in the previous week of triathlon. And I think there's no doubt, we discussed this, and the obvious decision here is Mirinda Carfrae. Rini, as she's affectionately known, she had the Freak of the Week performance just because she just demonstrated such dominating run performance once they got into Elite E Drive. The heat seemed to affect her not at all, and she just maintained that amazing cadence, that perfect run. She has not perfect running form, but she is as close to perfect running form as you're going to see.
It's pretty nice to look at her run. I mean, she looks like she's effortless.
Yeah, just her cadence, her turnover. If you look at her hip drive, you know, she does have a little bit of a forward lean from her ankles, like I like to see, just that falling forward momentum that Bobby McGee, the famous running guru, is big on. And she's so quick to load her legs and unload. You know, it's a very explosive running style. And I had a lot of pictures of her where it was almost hard not to find a picture of her just in perfect extension, just powering off each step. And her running cadence is easily, you know, 100 or over. So that's on par with guys like Haile Gebrselassie, former world record holder at the marathon. So, you know, she is a little bit shorter at 5 feet tall. But just amazing runs, and it just never stopped. You know, she hit Lee, she hit Polani. You know, she was running down, you know, Meredith Kessler by the time they hit Polani Hill. And when I saw them, you know, heading towards Energy Lab, you know, Rachel Joyce only had maybe a 20-second gap heading into Energy Lab. So just amazing to watch that.
And what impressed me the most, not really impressed me, but she had a lot of fans there because they were showing the big screen, and I think by the point that she made the pass, the men's race was coming to a close. So a lot of people's eyes were on Rini and the women's race, and everybody started cheering. I think people really wanted her to win and perform well. I feel a little bit bad for Rachel Joyce, but you know, that's just how Ironman works out. And I think Mirinda is you know, she's liked by a lot of the fans, and certainly there was mixed reaction of her embrace with T.O., which, come on people, you can't, you know, they didn't take their clothes off and start doing things that they're not supposed to be doing in public. I mean, they just embraced it. So
I think they were just so happy T.O. had a breakout. He was a top American, finishing in 5th place. Great performance by T.O. to have Rini set the record, and they're getting married in just about a month in December. So she's been growing her hair out, just in case you're wondering why Rini's been growing her hair out. She's getting married in just a month. So you know, maybe she can now become Bridezilla after the Ironman is behind her now.
Well, she does win, what is it, $120,000 for first place, or $150,000?
Oh, you know, it's a pretty good payday, and that's nothing compared to the sponsors she's going to obviously be signing with, again, like Chocolate Milk and K-Swiss and Felt Bikes, and the list goes on and on.
Castelli.
Yeah, she's probably still out there on the lava rocks taking pictures with sponsors as we speak.
So, awesome race both on the men's and the women's. There was a course record on the pro women. There was also a course record on the amateur men.
Yeah, I was fortunate enough to watch. When I saw the leader on the men's race, I saw a guy named Daniel Stubleski from Michigan. He was an American. He had about a 1 minute lead on the second age group when I saw him at mile 3. I thought he had it in the bag. The runner coming up behind him was a guy named Kyle Buckingham from South Africa, and they're both running about the same pace. Whereas Daniel kind of faltered a little bit later in the race and ran about a 3:07 marathon. Kyle Buckingham, ran sub 3 hours and went a ridiculously fast 8 hours 37 minutes to set an age group record at Kona. Take the record from Trevor Dussault, who's now with Team TBB as a pro, racing successfully. So looking forward to see what Kyle Buckingham can do. I think he'll probably be turning pro if he knows what's good for him in the next couple of years, and looking forward to seeing what he can do.
Yeah, and speaking of the amateurs, there was a lot of things that I learned about Kona that I didn't know before going there. And one of those is that everybody's fast. And they either should let a lot more people in through the lottery or just sponsor exceptions, or just not let anybody, because that course comes 6 o'clock. I mean, the sun's not even down, and the course just looks like, it looks like the Wild West with nobody. I mean, there's just absolutely nobody. There's very few people running. And it just, there's not nearly as much support as you find in other races. I mean, you assume that the course is lined with spectators throughout the day, throughout the course. That's not the case. There's really not that many people watching.
You have the people that qualified, and then you have everybody else. Mm-hmm. There was such a clear demarcation point between those that qualified and those that probably were having a really off day, or people that got a foundation slot or something like that. But it was amazing. We were staying on Elite Drive, and I told you going into the race that you're just going to see so many fit people all day, every day, running fast, that look in amazing shape, that just look like the pinnacle of the human condition, and it almost psychs you out. So when I go back to Kona, whenever I talk to athletes going to Kona, I always recommend if you get psyched out by that kind of stuff, don't stay on Elite Drive. Don't even stay in town. Stay somewhere up near Waikoloa Village. Don't let yourself get psyched out by all these amazing athletes that are constantly working out, and it's easy to get psyched out by that.
It is, and we had an awesome time. It was great to be there, but yeah, it's just once the sun went down and I just saw how little activity there was, and just the few racers that were still out on the course, it was just so lonely out there. Part of how you get through an Ironman marathon sometimes, it's just you get energy from the people watching and from the people cheering, and there was very little of that, unfortunately. And I didn't know that before going there, and I guess it makes sense just because everybody who qualifies is just so fast.
Yeah, and it's just it's a difficult to get to destination. It's not a big city. There's obviously points of the course where you can't have spectators, and it's just difficult to get around. So yeah, there's probably about 16 miles of the course where you don't have any spectators, especially if you're slower.
Yeah. So with that, does that conclude our segment in which we talk about the race and the recap?
Yeah, it's time to talk about my favorite subject in the entire world, which is triathlon gear, which we saw a lot of at the Triathlon Expo this week. And one of our favorite parts of the entire week was actually the bike count. The day before the race, every athlete has to bring down their bike, and it's a big show. Everyone's funneled in, all the pros, all the age groupers, all the photographers that are big in the sport are there taking pictures of all the athletes on their bikes. And one thing that was actually really interesting to me is that there are people that actually sit there and count bikes, not just bikes, but aero helmets, components, hydration systems, where the hydration systems are posted. Any single metric that you can possibly be looking at as far as equipment is concerned is actually captured and calculated and compiled into lists by people in the industry, because people want to see how are their brands doing versus other brands, what are the trends. And we saw some pretty interesting trends this week.
Yeah, and here's the thing about the Kona bike count. It's great, but it's also not necessarily indicative of what's going on. My best example is helmets. I mean, what does Rudy Project do for Kona athletes? They give away a free helmet. So, they had, I believe, 600 plus helmets there. But aside from that, I think it does give you a good idea of what the fast guys are riding. As I pull up the Lava Magazine bike count, It was no surprise. Cervelo, 488 bikes. I think most people were expecting that. Now I thought this was a year to go over 500 bikes. If they didn't do it this year, I think Trek and Specialized are going to continue to inch their way up. But it seems like those three just kind of have, obviously they have the most share, but they keep gaining and everybody else just kind of keeps dividing themselves.
What was interesting to you and I, we were talking about this, it's obvious, you know, you're going to see Cervelo and Specialized and Treks of the world way up there, but there were some huge surprises of bike companies that had very little representation.
Cannondale, for example, 79. I mean, that was one of those where just like, Cannondale, huge bike company, they have tons of money to sink into promoting their triathlon bike, which is really the Slice. The Slice RS is not much of a triathlon bike, or even just if not counting those bikes, coming up with something that works for triathletes. I mean, that's a huge segment of the market that if you know how to target it, it can be very profitable. You know how triathletes spend money. I mean, if it saves you 5 watts,
absolutely, yeah.
So
what else did we see at the bottom of the list? There were a couple other surprises aside from Cannondale.
Yeah, so I mean, you see very few. I mean, you look at once you get to under 10. I mean, you see all kinds of bikes that you may or may have not heard about. I mean, you look at Focus, only 5 bikes. I mean, Focus is a very big brand, only 5 bikes.
They sponsor teams in the Tour de France, and to see Focus so far down there, and they have a legitimate tri-bike now. It was kind of sad to see that.
I mean, you look at somebody like Stevens. Stevens had 17 bikes, which is, you know, more than 3 times what Focus had. You look at Pinarello, only 5. I mean, I guess they don't really have a triathlon bike. It's just their time trial bike that they've developed for Team Sky, you know, a few years back, as it's not the latest super bike that they came out with. But yeah, I mean, there's just you know, there's once you get down below the big 3 and then the Felts and the Scotts, it really drops off. You know, Quintana Roo had 80 bikes, and yeah, they're a very small company, but for a triathlon bike company, I feel like that number should be higher, especially because they do work with some athletes that qualify, and they give them a free frame for qualifying. So almost kind of like Rudy Project, but not to the same extent.
But speaking of Rudy Project, they have a new helmet coming out that's apparently the latest and greatest, called the Wing 57. We sat down with John Cobb to discuss the Wing 57, what's it all about, what's the advantage of it, and we saw a ton of athletes, particularly pros, riding this Wing 57 helmet. A lot of athletes doing pretty well in it. I heard reviews that it was actually very well ventilated. It felt good. The visor worked well. So looking forward to that helmet. It's not yet CPSC certified, like John said to us in the interview. It'll be coming in January. So right now, the athletes that got the free helmets, they're going to have to be using those helmets just at races outside the U.S. or
Los Cabos and St. Croix, and yeah, but. Which, you know, it's, I guess when you get a free helmet, you know, you can't look at a free horse's teeth or whatever. You love my sayings because I never get them right. You get the saying.
You don't look a gift horse in the mouth. That's what I'm here for, to correct Andres' misinterpretation.
I don't think I've ever, talking to Kevin, I always bring something up like that, and I never get it right. So he always does. So I guess it works out well. But talking about the wheels, Zip just completely dominates, and it's about a 10-1 from then to Mavic, which was in 2nd place. I would have thought Head would have been in 2nd place. I mean, Head used to be huge in triathlon, both on the side of wheels and also aero bars.
Like you said, triathletes have money, and when they know they can get a watt advantage or a 2-watt advantage, they obviously have their new CXR rims, the 80s and the 60s with a nice rim strip. Apparently saves a couple watts. And for athletes that are spending $20,000, $30,000, $50,000 a year on the sport, like some athletes do, you know, what's another $2-3 grand instead of the fastest wheels that you can buy?
The ones that surprised me were Easton. Easton's a huge company, only 50 wheels, and these are individual wheels, just because a lot of people, what they do is they match a front wheel with a rear wheel, and Easton only had 25 bikes worth of wheels. And
one of them was Andy Raylard, who didn't finish the race and you know, had a little bit of an issue. So it's like we said, it's interesting to see who's at the top, but it's more surprising and more interesting to me to see who's at the very bottom of the list.
Yeah, and you know, moving on to different and we could talk about this sort of stuff all day, but you know, we don't have all day. Rear hydration, front hydration. They had obviously helmets, whether they were long tail helmets or just road helmets or aero helmets. There's just lots of stuff. So absolutely fascinating. You can find it on Lava Magazine. They did the same thing with shoes. So definitely check that out for sure.
All right, so I hope you liked our recap edition of This Week in Triathlon for Kona Week. Andres and I had a great time bringing you the best coverage we possibly could. If you'd like to see more videos, go to our YouTube channel. We have 90 videos from Race Week, and we also have lots of pictures on our Facebook page. You can find us at facebook.com/thisweekintriathlon.
Yes, and I'll show off my tan one more time because I don't think it's going to be here all year round, so I'm proud of it. And yeah, I guess we'll see you guys over the next week or so.
All right, thanks for tuning in.